So please write in the chat if anything should go south and you cannot hear me anymore, because I'm not too certain if that happens or not. So just shout out if something happens, yeah? Okay.
So today, Mr. Nam will coordinate, and first of all, we will share some questions and just repeat our expectations about the information that you can share with us for today. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. Those are the two questions that you had, right? So how to build a national network as a community builder and how to connect it with other nations' networks. You asked it more from the perspective of my personal experience. And the second one, how to connect and coordinate resources to to support startups. Yeah. Those two questions, right? Yeah. I'll dive into both questions during my my session, and also explain a bit my own experience in these cases, also in terms of startup grant. So,
haven't seen your screen yet.
Excuse me?
We cannot see your screen yet. It still has you are started sharing screen. So maybe this. Are you sharing your screen?
I am sharing my screen.
But we have not seen yet.
Okay, let me try something. Let me try something.
Okay, we see it now.
Now you see the screen?
Yes, we can see it now.
Okay. And audio also still works, yeah? The audio also still works? Hello?
Hello? Hello?
Yeah. Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, please highlight if you should not see my screen anymore, if you should not hear my screen. These are the two questions that you raised before. I did not phrase them in the way how you appointed them to me from my personal perspective, because I wanted to dive into them more from a general perspective and then add on my personal experience. Okay. Yeah, it's probably better if you, from time to time, if I make a pause, if you just say something that I know you're still here. It's a good indicator that I see you moving, but just as a second one that you sometimes make a short, okay.
Okay.
Good. All right. So for those of you who do not know me yet, I want to give a very short introduction what I actually have done. So I think one of the reasons why you reached out to me was because of Startup Grind. Roughly 3.5 years ago, I started Startup Grind in Beijing as a chapter director. Startup Grind is the largest independent community organization in the world, currently present in 600 cities worldwide and in 125 countries. In 2018, I was able to scale the chapter to one of the largest and most active chapters in the world, so out of the 600. And at one point, I looked a bit beyond my own pond and started supporting China as China country manager. And since beginning of the year, I actually started taking the role of APEC manager. currently looking on 120 cities in Asia region, anything from Azerbaijan up to New Zealand. So there I have a very diverse viewpoint on what's happening in terms of startup ecosystems around the region. During my daytime, I work for Zhongguancun Inoway, which is a state-owned enterprise in the heart of Haidian, which is a district in Beijing, and where most of the unicorn companies actually come from. Sadly, that's also where the internet is so bad. So not really something I'm proud of. But anyway, so at Inoway, I have two roles. I started as Senior Manager Corporate Innovation because my background is actually on strategy consulting. And I shifted at one point more on the corporate innovation sector. And I opened the team up here with a focus on international Fortune 500s wanting to innovate with local resources. So there I matchmake startup companies with Fortune 500 companies in different industry verticals. So very strongly in automotive, food and beverage, semiconductors. So a lot of industries actually covered. Some examples there are Walmart, Daimler, Volkswagen, Hitachi, yeah, just to name a few. Until roughly a year ago, I started being head of community at Zhongguancun Inoway. We created a new brand that is called The Lab. The Lab focuses on building a startup community focusing on international entrepreneurs here in Beijing and helping them to start their companies. And I work very closely with the government together, the Haidian government, to develop programs, but also to kind of adjust the policies that we have here for international entrepreneurs. Just as a side information, Haidian is one of the largest districts in Beijing, roughly 4 million people we have here, and it's in the west of Beijing. I live in Chaoyang, which is the second or the largest district, currently 6.5 million people, and I commute every day to 20 kilometers to work. Just that you have a understanding of size and how many kilometers I cover. And in between, there are a lot of different startup ecosystem cells that are important. I will come to them a bit later. Most recent, well, let's say a year ago, I started my own startup, Founders Lair, which kind of bridges all the common things that I've seen community builders, but also ecosystem builders doing wrong. I share a couple of my insights from that startup also in the later stage. Currently, we have a team of 10 people all around the world. And yeah, but I would share a bit more later. One additional platform that I started roughly 8 months ago was the German innovators in China, called in short Gin, like the drink, but with a double N. And there we built a platform for mostly German startups to actually get to know the Chinese startup ecosystem without any filter. Because I'm not sure how much you know about the Chinese startup ecosystem or China's perception, or the perception of China in the outside world. A lot of people in the market, they either love China or they hate China. There is usually a very limited, unbiased amount of knowledge available in the market, and we wanted to neutralize this a bit, and yeah, helping German startups to kind of get to know the people in China who have a real understanding of the market, that they don't end up with the wrong people. So all in all, as you can see, I'm bridging a lot of players, governments, corporates, community organizations, service providers, and have a broad understanding of both the local Chinese, the international APAC, but also the German startup ecosystems. Short check if you're still there. Okay, cool. Yeah. Also, one thing that you see on the bottom, there are 3 of our values. That was actually why I joined Startup Grind. Help others, give first, and make friends. I truly believe in give first, because that's one of the things that helped me to build actually the community organization here in Beijing. And that is one thing that you definitely need to also adapt to if you want to have a nice bottom-up community development that will be able to strongly support any entrepreneur. What that means is always try to help, especially entrepreneurs, without asking anything back. All right. Oops. Let me rearrange that a bit. So the first section, how to build a national network as community builder and how to connect it with other nations network. So I will explain to you my development on how I actually got to the point of understanding what it means to have a national network. And my approach is from a bottom-up approach versus a top-down. What I mean with this is, in Asia especially, there is a very strong top-down approach. So usually the governments give a certain direction of where you want to develop as an ecosystem. You give resources to universities, to incubators and accelerators to build this. This is a good way, but it also needs to have a counterpart, the bottom-up approach, where people can start to build and shape their own ecosystems around them. And so this is more the government versus the community way. And I'm gonna elaborate more on the community way, but also tap into the government way. So when I started Startup Grind, I knew not much about the startup ecosystem. The only thing that I knew was that there is a lot of energy in the community, and it has a strong vibe of people want to get together and build something. That was how I started, and when I became a director in 2015 for Beijing, I actually didn't know what I was doing, but I started regularly doing events and building my team. And that was actually the key for me to get closer to the understanding of what a national network could be. What that means is, if you don't have regular events on a monthly basis or weekly basis, nobody will recognize you as a functional part of an ecosystem. And I coincidentally found, I think, the right ingredients to kind of position ourselves. One was we did 2 Startup Grind events every month, so people saw us everywhere. And the other one was I grew the team quite early on to an extensive size of volunteers. So usually community organizations linger with like 5 people. My goal was to have as many people as possible, and we scaled it to up to 30 people. So in order to actually be able to think about a national, you first need to run your own ecosystem well. So I'm not sure if you saw that the bubble kind of increases. If you don't, if you don't increase kind of your reach, your quality, you cannot think beyond. That is the same if you look on a startup. Very often startups approach me in China and they say, hey, I want to enter the Chinese market. And I ask them, okay, do you have a product? Do you have investment already? And if the startups have not successfully launched any product in their home country or home market, I usually never encourage them to enter the Chinese market, because you first need to have a strong foot on the ground, and then you can start exploring what's outside. That's the same with the bottom-up approach and with respect to communities. So only if you understand the ingredient of your local ecosystem and how you can make an impact as a community, then you can grow. And once you do this and you understand what you're doing and you stabilize, then you can actually start looking around. So in the terms of Vietnam, it could be that a community organization in Hanoi would slowly have some traction, and they will understand what they're doing and having a good network and a good team. Only then they should start actually looking around and looking at Ho Chi Minh and other cities, saying like, okay, what is actually out there? What are they doing? And then you can start comparing yourself with those, not before. Because otherwise, if you're in an infant stage and you compare yourself or you reach out, you have nothing to give, and you cannot take anything because you don't know what you're actually doing. And that is something that we did in Beijing. So after the first year, we grow exponentially. And I started looking around actually what's happening outside of Beijing. And I looked for, so if you see here, it's just like now 5 points, but one was I looked at Shanghai and I saw Shanghai is doing this and this, which actually works quite fine, but it's very different to what we were doing. Or I was looking at a Xi'an, and Xi'an is a central city in China, has a good potential to be a good startup hub, but they were at a very infant stage. And I looked at other ecosystems that that were either more advanced to us or less advanced. But what I realized after looking at around 20 ecosystems in China was that most of the ecosystems were actually not as advanced as us. So once I saw that, I started actually reaching out to the community organizations and the community builders in the cities and taught them about what works for us and what doesn't work for us. So I helped them to grow. That was the first point of actually realizing that there is a network, and the network is always existing as points, but how you connect it is somebody needs to step up and actually reach out to the others and offer them a hand, saying like, okay, this is what you can do. And that you can only do if you're like one of the strongest in the market and you understand really well what you do and you have a lot of resources to share. Any questions so far here?
No.
Okay. The key is, if you want to build a national network from a bottom-up approach, is you need to identify a person who is willing to actually lead a country strategy. That sounds much easier as it is, because you need to have a bit of a broader viewpoint on things. Especially in community building, most community builders have a very, very inside view. So they look at what is happening in Hanoi and how can I help the startups in Hanoi. They seldomly look at, okay, I have people in Hanoi and they want to grow. How do I help them to get outside? Because that's beyond their level of impact. So they cannot control what's outside. And that's in the nature of community builders usually. So it's very crucial to identify one person who has kind of the willingness and the capacity and the resources to look beyond and actually think about, okay, what can we do as a country? For me, so in China, that was me, because I saw also a professional benefit of doing what I was doing, even though I was working as a volunteer. So everything that I just mentioned before, running the Beijing chapter and starting to support other startup ecosystems, I was doing entirely for free. And I'm still doing it for free. So, but the thing I got back was I grew my network. I grew my resources beyond my own city. And I realized that I actually can help much more people by doing so. And by doing that, I also got more resources to my real job at Inaway, which is paying my bill. So for me, it was the right thing to do. But just as a side information, right now, I'm looking for a successor for me to take over the China country strategy as a country manager. And it is very hard for me to find someone who wants to step up and take this role. And to be honest, I've not found the secret ingredient yet how to identify this. I will bring some examples later on for Pakistan and India and China, that you see a bit what the country extent is and where we have people who took this this responsibility and where we don't have people who took this responsibility. So if you're in lack of the person driving this, you will never be able to drive any country level strategy. And you will be sitting on these bubbles, not working with each other. So one thing, if you identified who this person is, same as in a company, you should start setting yourself goals. What is it actually that you want to reach? Do you want more followers? Do you want to create more startups? Do you want to help more startups to get out of your ecosystem and grow beyond your market? Or are there other KPIs that you have? So do you want ecosystem collaboration to rise? Anything like this. And this is something that usually in startup communities is not happening, neither in a startup weekend nor in a startup grind before, or any other community organization. So they are not setting any regional goals of, let's do this, let's try to achieve this. For us, my goal was actually to kind of develop us in the regions where we are not at yet, and to raise the quality of what we are doing. So I wanted to help the community builders to get a better understanding what it means to be a community builder and what it means to be in in a startup ecosystem, and how to help startup founders. This is something that's very hard to quantify and to set as goals. But for community organizations, one KPI that you should have is running regular events, as I said before. The moment you start running regular events, people will recognize you as a crucial part of the community. And so I helped all the startup ecosystems in China, for example, to raise the bar, to get from 6 events per year to 10, to 12, to 20, and to beyond. And this was something, the more they interact with people, the more they realize actually what they're doing. And we could bring in then speakers that help them to get a more diverse angle on what they were doing. The next thing that you need to do if you're looking on the regional or country network is actually identify the players who actually need something that your region cannot offer. Most countries actually, they have a lot of people where you can identify them quite early because the market doesn't give them everything. So except for, I would say, US, India and China, no country in the world will offer everything a startup needs. So I come from Germany. Even in Germany, a startup can seldomly grow beyond a B round without tapping into international markets. And once they need to tap into international markets, there are certain things that they will need outside of Germany. And that's the same with Vietnam. Your startups will be able to grow until a certain extent, but you will have a very, very hard time actually creating a unicorn from your own capacity and resources. So you need to start learning, okay, who are the people that actually need to go out, and how will you help them? And building a group or building a database of people who actually have this demand is the next thing that you need to do, and actually kind of categorize what they want. Because from every country to country, it's different. It depends on what your country's strengths are in terms of industry development, in terms of resources, in terms of talent. It could be that your own country is in lack of, for example, AI and machine learning talent. So then you need to look around which country has to offer this. Or maybe your market is too small. If you have B2C startups that you don't have enough people to actually take the products. Once you've done this database, you have created kind of, okay, who's currently not happy with what you're offering, then you can actually start exploring the outside. And that is something that we did in Beijing as well. Honestly speaking, in Beijing, it's a bit different. It is usually internationals coming to us, so it's vice versa. Because everybody wants to tap into the Chinese market. It's so vast and so promising that a lot of international startups actually come to us, and they are more struggling with, where should I go first? What are the resources that I need? Who can I trust? So it's a bit vice versa. But let's take now the example of Vietnam. It would be like this, that you have identified the database of people that actually need to get out, and you know what their demands are. And then you can start actually exploring and looking around for supportive community builders or networks in the region that actually can meet these demands. But if you don't know what the people want and you don't have a database and a list, then you don't know what you're actually looking for. And more often than not, actually what you will find are individuals or organizations that will be supportive, but not entire ecosystems that you can reach out to. So there is this over-romanticized kind of thinking of, there is Germany, and Germany as a national ecosystem can work with, let's say, Vietnam, and then we will start exchanging resources. Doing this is very, very hard because most of the time the national startup ecosystem is not defined as such, because the single parts of the national startup ecosystem are not defined, which are usually the cities, the ecosystems, the base material of any startup ecosystem, which are the base material to any national network. So I highlighted here two bubbles, which are national ecosystems, but most likely what you will do is you want to have a collaboration with Korea. Then you will find one player that will be supportive. That could be KICT, or you go to Osaka, where you can work with Startup Bootcamp and Rainmaker, and they will be supportive, supporting actually the startups that you need. Also, why I don't think that it will be very likely that you find a collaboration model on that level is if there is a national network that you want to collaborate with, who will be the leader? Very often, the leader is a government official. So if it would be Germany, you would probably talk to the German Startup Association, a representative. But the problem is this person does actually not know everything that's happening in the ecosystem as such. They only know certain aspects. And when you're talking to them, it will become a very superficial exchange, because it's like you want to collaborate, but you don't know who you actually represent and what you want to exchange. Yeah, that's at least my experience that I had working with government representatives trying to represent entire national ecosystems. One thing that is super important for any ecosystem out there is actually to define what you're good at and what you're not. This is more the reflection of what a lot of cities and ecosystems are not doing yet. And sometimes they think they are not good at something, and they think they need to look outside to actually fill the gap. But very often it's not the case. It's like they can also look in the inside and build it there. So they don't need to look beyond. But what I mean with that, I will explain in a bit. Is there another bullet point? 1 second, I need to rearrange. Oh yeah. Cooperate with national and regional governments in order to execute official country strategies. What I mean with this is during our development path in Beijing, and we got a name in the ecosystem, is the largest and most international startup community organization. And we were known beyond, and we are still known beyond our reach in Beijing. So the cities outside of Beijing still know us. One of the first governments approaching us was the Chaoyang government, which I just mentioned I live in. And they wanted to develop a landing program with us, where we helped them to kind of develop a landing platform for international startups to land in the Chaoyang district. They paid us for this, and now we are in the 3rd year actually of doing this. So once you understand kind of how to run your own community, then you can start working with local governments and try to meet what their demands are. And what the interesting point of view is you're working on the ground with the entrepreneurs. You know what they want. So you can kind of translate to the governments what's actually needed, what other stakeholders rarely can do. So neither investors or incubators or accelerators have actually the power to define what startups want, because they are very limited towards their own space. And yeah, so that's why I say for us, once we develop, we actually develop quite tight collaboration strategies with the China government, later on also with the Haidian government. And now we are working with different regional governments in China to help them to develop a better international startup ecosystem. Still there?
Yeah.
Okay.
How long do you, like you said it, but it sounds so like simple and easy, but I know it actually quite hard, but how long do it take for like when you approach the other cities and then for them to like join with your like your vote and then to establish as a reason for supporting startup?
I did not hear you very clearly. Maybe the best is, so I'm not sure if you hear me very clearly, but can you write the question shortly in the chat? Is that possible?
How long did it take for the other cities to like join with you at first and then to form like the first bubble that you choose to like present? How long did it take?
Okay, so you were asking about the timing. I will stay on this slide and tell you a couple of things about the progress. So the Beijing ecosystem, as you see here right now on the map, it started mid of 2015. The 5 triangles that you see there are university chapters. So we started with the largest universities actually in Beijing to also start chapters there, which is Renmin University, Beida University, UCAS, a couple of others. But we first started only with a chapter. So the first one was the red dot. And as I said, within 1 year, we grew to become the largest startup community organization of Startup Grind, at least. And we were capable of running around 40 events per year, 40. So that means we had around 3 events per month, covering anything from investment to how to pitch your startup, to automotive innovation, a lot of ground we actually covered there. In the second year, we started actually building the university chapters, because we realized that there was, especially in China, a lot of turf that we have not covered yet, because the university students were not the right targeted audience for us. But we had the tool of working with universities through our sub-brand, which is Startup Grind University. It took us roughly a year to develop the 5 chapters that we have now. And at that point, I was not looking beyond Beijing yet. So, 2015 we started, 2016 we took off, 2017 was the year that we then became the most active. 2018 we had the 5 university chapters, and then we were roughly reaching around 15,000 entrepreneurs in the region within a year. And at that time we were not looking beyond yet much. But a lot of people reaching out to us. So in 2018, I started looking around and saying, okay, Xi'an, what I just mentioned, they only have 6 events per year. Why is that? So I opened up a call and I said like, hey, how are you doing? What are you struggling with? So I analyzed what they are doing and what they are facing as problems. That's the same what I did with Wuhan, with Nanchang. Nanchang is a new chapter, with Shenyang. And I started giving them advice on what they can do. Oops, that's India. What they can do in order to actually get to where we are now. The city's doing great at the point where Shenzhen and Shanghai, Chengdu as well. And within, roughly a year, all chapters kind of realized that I was offering a hand to all of them. So that was also when the headquarter of Startup Grind offered me kind of the role of we need a person who can run the entire country strategy, because we see that you're doing this without asking anything back. And for us, China was a very special market because for those of you who do not know, there is a international internet and there is a Chinese internet. There is the Great Firewall that you need VPNs for in order to circumvent and to access certain tools. And everything that we have developed for, let's say, 550 chapters globally doesn't work in China. So they needed actually someone to kind of bridge all of this. And yeah, I took the job, and then within 1.5 years, we developed then a countrywide strategy of how to improve the quality of all the chapters. And I raised the bar kind of on the level of Shanghai and Shenzhen. Beijing was a bit too crazy because we were doing too much. And so far, none of them, except for Shenzhen, has been able to reach that. Now the strategy is actually more on developing new chapters, but which is quite hard because Xining, for example, is one of the newest chapters. Just as an explanation, the red circle means that the city usually has inhabitants above 1 million. The lilac, or whatever color it is, square means that there are less than 300,000 people. Xining is a highland area where the people are very scattered, and the type of startups and entrepreneurs that emerge from there are quite different to the hotspots like Shanghai and Beijing. They are focusing more on restaurants, on personal developments, on farming, and it needs a very different approach than what we did in the rest of the country. But at the at the end, the demands are still the same, because if you want to build a business, the tools are usually quite often the same until you come to the point that you want to scale. Then it's starting to become different. Does it answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah. This, what you see here now, is also not very common for startup grind at this point. One problem that we had from a bottom-up approach, and I just tell you about a bit of experience from what I know from the headquarter, is they tried it before to empower people to take over the country regional strategy. But one problem that happens is people take the title, but they usually don't start doing things. And especially when you're starting to do a bottom-up approach, it's very hard to get then rid of the people who are taking the title of country manager and not delivering. They have seen that what I've done was quite different. That was also why they offered me the position of APAC manager. And now I'm developing this as a country strategy, which I'm rolling out in Pakistan, India, Malaysia, and Australia. And we are initiating this in China as well. So we have defined kind of the position of a country manager to kind of what is it that we want as an organization them to do, and what is it that we give back to them, that they also see that it's worth doing it. Vietnam, not yet, because Vietnam, I'm still exploring what to do with Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh. I'm personally working a lot with them, so we have also 2 chapters in Vietnam, but my approach there is a bit different. But I work very closely right now with Kathy and Hachi, which are both the Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh directors. But I don't have that here as an example now. Just that you see, so also in India, we developed the overview, looking at regions, what are we missing, what are we not missing. India is quite different from a development stage. Also the way how communities are perceived are very, very different to what it is in China. Also having the benefit of being able to use Google and all the tools that we use in our organization helps a lot in terms of the expansion. But when I said before that we are rolling out the country manager strategy, is the problem in India is that so far the experience that we had was also people want to be entitled, but then will not do the job. And that is something that I'm still struggling with. And I think India has the most potential in terms of growth from a startup ecosystem perspective, but it needs the right people. Any national ecosystem strategy needs the right people. If you fail on this, you will not be able to bring them together. A good example is Pakistan. We have a very strong country manager, which doesn't have the official title yet, but he's like me, just in Pakistan, and he started to reach out and bring everyone together, and yeah, started to bring speakers to all the more distant chapters. He started to bring quality in it. He started to teach about tools that you can use. He started to raise the bar and everything. So Pakistan, I would say, is a role model right now. Only problem that we have with Pakistan is that they're using tools that are not directly ours, and we don't have so much access to the data. Do you have any questions regarding the country overview right now?
Can I ask you about like startup right will approach the someone in these countries, or like someone in this country approach you, or you have to approach them by yourself?
You mean to as a country director, as a country manager? Yeah. So from my experience, the best thing is you approach them. If they approach you, it's the wrong sign already. You need to give it a bit of time and understand actually what the country dynamics are. And you need to see who is actually naturally already doing it and reaching the hand. And once you identify the people who actually represent your values, you need to start empowering them. And that is what happened with me. That quarter saw that I was already doing it, and they came out to me and said, "Hey, Jelte, don't you want to like help China to grow?" I never considered it, but I was already doing it. So then they offered me the title, and that's one thing that is very, very important that you need to look at. So here in Pakistan, we have now 25 chapters, and we were looking at who's there and what are they doing. And our country director, who doesn't have the official title yet, is Azish. And we just said, like, you're doing the job, you should get the job. And he said, yes, he wants it. So in India, it's not possible because we have not identified the right people yet. And before, we had a country director for India who just took the job. And yeah, because at that point, we were saying we need country directors, and the people who were shouting the loudest just got it. So also Startup Grind is not too old yet. We are 10 years old. We started from, from 2010, actually in Silicon Valley. And now we are covering 3 million entrepreneurs globally in 600 cities, which is quite an extensive growth. And so we also made our mistakes on the way. And I'm now developing kind of the counter strategy of getting back to the national level, because just that you understand how we are running on an operational level, we have 6 regional managers. So we are covering Africa, Europe, Middle East, USA, South America, and Asia. And each is run usually by one person. And since we don't have country managers officially yet, it means that me as an APAC director would have to run and manage 120 cities in roughly 28 countries. I doubt that anybody has the mental capacity to really know the difference between a Japan, a Mongolia, a Malaysia, a Vietnam, and being able to understand really what the differences are as such. So I always saw that Startup Grind needed to develop into the direction of we need a country manager who understands the regional pros and cons, but also has an international mindset. Yeah, and this is what I'm developing right now, because now that I am in the APAC position, I realized that I'm failing in doing my job because my time is just not enough. So I would like to help more, but if I try to help 120 times 3 people, then the month doesn't have enough hours. Right?
One question. You said that you will find other networks in regions that can meet the demands of your network. So I want to ask, what did you find in Pakistan and India, in this case, that can help the ecosystem in China? Or why did you reach to those
Well, first of all, it came with my job. So already that I needed to kind of learn what is happening. But before I became APEC director, I started reaching out to other ecosystems because I got a lot of startups coming to us from different countries. So sometimes I got startups coming from Switzerland. Sometimes I got startups coming from Singapore or from Japan. And naturally, I wanted to learn more about what are the other ecosystems about. So are these good startups or are these good investors coming into town? So I naturally reached out to usually the startup grind directors in the local cities and regions and tried to learn from them what their ecosystems are about and how they measure. Well, one thing that I realized was sadly that also in a large international organization like Startup Grind, there's a huge difference in terms of quality. I had really bad experiences with this. I naturally want to connect with people. Also, when I'm traveling, I want to be able to connect to ecosystems and learn. And two of the mistakes that I can mention that I had was I wanted to learn about the Tokyo startup ecosystem and reach out to the local director, and I never got a reply back, which is usually a bad sign. But Tokyo is one of the major startup hubs in Asia, and I was not capable of tapping in. So at that point, I realized that I actually need to diversify my strategy and not only rely on my own organization, but also be capable of knowing what are other good organizations or community players in an ecosystem that I don't know. The same problem I encountered with Cambodia and Phnom Penh. I traveled there to experience the local startup ecosystem, but at the end, I never got a reply. So I never really got to know them. So now you're asking about Pakistan and India. India and so both countries have thousands and thousands of startups who want to grow. And currently both ecosystems are not mature enough to help them to grow as quickly as China. So everybody's naturally looking on the Chinese market. And through that, I realized that, especially in Pakistan, that there are people like me. And I wanted to kind of learn how to better integrate our learnings and to connect China and Pakistan. With India, I realized there's a lot of potential, but there's nobody leading. So I had a very scattered approach, and I was wasting tons of time to talk to 10, 20 different people to learn, and everybody was telling me a different story. And yeah, through that, I just learned, okay, I need to get involved in the regions and actually help them to put people on top, that there is more a country approach.
To add another questions, you said that you will hold like 3 events a month within your ecosystem. So I want to ask, what are your financial sources to run all those activities?
What are the what? Just the last part I didn't understand.
Like,
the resources?
The financial source.
Ah, okay. Interestingly, in the beginning, we never had any resources. So it was entirely run by volunteers, and how we could do the events was either by ticket sales. So people were paying, let's say $5, and they got food and drinks, but we never made any money on this. It was more on filtering out the people who want to really learn about the topic and the people who are just there for, I don't know, something different. Later on, so let's say once we hit the threshold of doing 2 events per month, all the players in the ecosystem started approaching us saying, we want to sponsor you. We want to work with you. We want to be speakers at your event. We want you to help us. Because there are not many players who actually can do that frequently. And with that, we easily got sponsors like HP, like Volkswagen, like Walmart. We got national governments starting to sponsor us for doing parties with entrepreneurship-minded people. And I would say in year 2 or 3, we got roughly around $80,000 US a year through sponsorships on top, which helped us to kind of level up the game of what the quality of our events was. Because before we were usually serving, let's say the average startup enthusiast who wants to learn about how to do a startup. But the already mature startups, they want more tailored events. They want to have smaller groups. They want to meet the people they need, and they don't want to play around that much. So in the beginning, our events usually had 100, 150 people. And later on, we added to our standard events also tailored and focused events with, let's say, investor matchmaking or entrepreneurs meet their peers, where we had high-level networking. We invited, let's say, 15 founders of different startups to either meet and mingle with each other, or we started to offer roundtables with corporates so that we could say, you are all IoT startups, here's a corporate that wants to grow in IoT, let's have a dinner together. So we also started then to diversifying more our portfolio of knowledge. We went more into robotics, into healthcare. We started serving the verticals and the tech areas, which helped us. So that was possible then with the sponsorship money that we got.
Is the same with other countries, like do you have to finance the community managers in other country, or they have to like gather the money by themselves to run all the activities there?
So actually, it's everywhere the same. It starts with so how a Startup Grind chapter usually starts is a person applies and says, I have this network. We check if this person really has a network in the application process. Once they start, they need to show that they are actually capable of running a community. And the only way how to measure that at this point is they do regular events. We only start recognizing the chapters if they're doing more than 1 event per month. So before, sometimes they reach out to us and say, do you have speakers from the headquarters? Do you have money from the headquarters? We ignore them, because if they're not capable of doing 1 event per month, they're usually not capable of running an activity. Once they show to us that they run more than 1 event per month, and they do this for over a year, then we start introducing our global sponsors also to them. So Startup Grind as an organization, sometimes we introduce, for example, AWS, CVS, or Google for Startups as sponsors to sponsor the local chapters. But we handpick the chapters who are capable of doing more than 1 event per month and who are responsive. So as I mentioned before, Tokyo and Phnom Penh, they were not responsive to me at all. And those chapters usually do not get any sponsorships because they are not responsive, even if they would do like 1 event per month. I'm not sure if that answered your question.
Okay. I want to ask that how do, like you said, you hold the event for matchmaking. So how do you find founders and investors to join at first?
How to ask investors and whom to do what?
How do you find founders, as startup founders as well as investors, to join the event at first? Like before it's become well known, and then everybody like come to approach you, like the first event or like the first or like the second event. How do you find the people to come to your event, and then usually like how much is how many people usually join one event?
Yeah, that's a good question. Honestly, you will have it much easier than me in the beginning, because as I said, when I started, I did not know much about startups. I was not an entrepreneur myself. I was not working in the industry. I was just a corporate strategy consultant with having a sister in New York who had a startup. That was it. So I am a natural curious person, and I started reaching out to people in my network to kind of learn about what entrepreneurship is about. And only like, let's say after 2 years, I realized what are good entrepreneurs and what are not, what are good investors and what are not. So I don't think that in the first 2 years, or let's say 1.5, I did a particularly good job of identifying the right startup founders or investors. But by doing it over and over again and tapping into different industries and markets, you started to realize to read the mood in an ecosystem. And now I can say what people are interested in, and I can much better identify and say, do you want to be a speaker at our Startup Grind event? So I can reach out to a robotics startup, which is in the batch of one of the leading, let's say, university programs here in China, and ask them, do you want to be on a panel with us about future of robotics in the food industry? And they would say yes, because what they're interested in is that we have a wide reach, and we also know what we are doing, and we give them something back that they want, which are usually resources that they currently need. So every time, again, that comes back to the values, help others, give first. So it's not that I just go to them and say like, hey, can you be a speaker? I ask them, okay, how are you doing as a founder? What is it that you currently need? And in any stage of a development of a startup, they usually need something. So in this case, it's just an example. A-Round funded startup, and what they needed was connections to the corporate world who are interested in meeting robotics startups who can help them with their production lines. So what I did in the beginning was I was just introducing first the corporates to them, and then I asked like, okay, can we have an event actually at one point? So it takes a bit of time nurturing your connections, and it's always the give first approach. Once the people, and especially the founders who take a lot of sweat and effort and blood into their work, realize that you're a helpful partner, they will do a lot to give back to you, because they know that you will empower the ecosystem and connect the right people. And now what we are doing is through these closed door events of the founders lunches or founders dinners, we actually have created this kind of channel to get speakers from there. So the founders bring their own peer friends who say, you need to go to this event because you meet the right people. And usually when we sit there, we can talk to the new ones and make them speakers. And with that, it grows. So for us, it was also super important to actually build a portfolio of startup founders, a database, and continuously inviting them to lunches and dinners and getting to know them a bit better and seeing how you can help them. The investors is a bit more difficult. So I would say they come in year number 3. You can get the average investors to be speakers in the beginning, but just learning a bit of what is the investment landscape like in your ecosystem. But to get the really big ones, like a Sequoia, like a 500 startups which is super strong in Vietnam, it takes a bit more time, unless you have a good name or reputation. So that that also depends a bit on who you currently have sitting there and what is your pull on people. But even though you have the power and the network to get the right people, sometimes you don't want to put any investor to be a speaker, because what you want to create, ideally to have a very healthy startup ecosystem, is a certain culture that you want to be represented no matter what. So even though somebody is a very high investor at a Sequoia, it might be that you don't want to invite them because they have a bad reputation as a person. So you want to have people who have a good track record of being an investor, but also having the right values that you want to represent, which are, again, give first and help others. And there I can drop a couple of names actually in the region, because once you get a reputation of having high quality network that is supportive, they know their stuff, and yeah, they are founders first and supporting others, then you will be a natural magnet for any entrepreneur that comes up from an early stage or later stage, or coming even from the outside. I have a couple of more slides. I'm not sure what the time is. Let me just see. How much more time do we have?
We have like, yeah, from 15 to 30 minutes.
Okay. I'm not entirely done with the presentation yet. We can stay in Q&A. Do you still have any other questions right now?
Maybe no, we don't have. Yeah, so maybe you can like go with your presentation and then we will ask you question later.
Okay. Yeah, I will also try to make that quick that we can come back to the Q&A again. So then your second question that you had, how to connect and coordinated resources to support startups. A very important question that you should ask yourself, what do you want to achieve? And how do you measure your success on these achievements, right? I'm not sure if you have a strategy for this, but since you have a government background, you should be very, very clear about what is your goal. Let me see what the next slide is. Because I'm bringing this up, the common mistake that I see talking with people in the startup ecosystem is they always say, we want to help startups. We want to help startups to connect to the right resources, but nobody knows what it actually means. They say startups are just one term, but they're not. And you need to be very, very sure about who are you serving and what is your target audience. So if you say as a government, you want to support startups, who do you want to serve? Is it that you want to create more opportunities for individuals to start their startup? Or do you want to help more early stage startups who are like, let's say, coming from the university, a team of 3 who doesn't have any investment to get more mature? Or do you want to help the mature startups to get beyond what your ecosystem can offer and bring them to a growth stage, which you have not reached yet for your local startups? Or is it maybe there is the little bubble that shows dead, that you want to help more with the recycling system of your startup ecosystem? So it can be any of those, but the thing is you need to be sure about who are you serving, what is your goal, and don't standardize the term startup because it means a lot of different things here. And each of these bubbles that I show here, by the way, they can also be divided into subcategories. So if you're talking about a soon-to-be founder, it can be an individual just having an idea or not having an idea yet, but just wants to have a startup. You can help those people. Or you have people who have an idea but don't know how to start. You can help those people. Or people who have an MVP but don't know how to run a startup. You can help those. So this is just like one bubble, and you can separate kind of each of these bubbles into different segments. And each of these segments needs a different strategy. You need to be very, very clear about who do you want to serve and how do you want to help building this. And ideally, as a startup ecosystem, you have kind of a funnel to support everyone from the beginning to the end. But very often in the corporate, but also in the government world, you're always talking about this stage. So early stage startup up to growth. So this is usually around A+ to B. This is what everybody wants to help, but they neglect that where do these startups come from? And my perception is you need to start the beginning, the foundation, in order to get a stronger funnel. But happy to talk with you later about this if you want. Then the next thing, so what is your ecosystem and what resources do you actually have and what are you missing? I'm highlighting just these questions because, again, this is something that most people don't ask themselves, and they don't have any kind of system to assess this. And what you see now, you see a change of colors. So the pink means it has to do with my own startup, and that's something that we actually developed, how to assess startup ecosystems and how to read them. What does it mean that you have at hand and what are you missing? if you don't have some model like this, then you're just poking into thin air and you're trying to hit something. But you need to start kind of writing down who do you have and who do you not have. Because again, you say you want to connect resources and connect to other national ecosystems. Why do you want to do it? Is it because you need more services or knowledge? Maybe you can build it within and you don't even need to look beyond. Maybe you're just missing a piece of the puzzle that can be very, very easily be implemented by yourself. And this is now a very basic view, but it should just show that you can read an ecosystem very quickly by just looking at what you have. I'll show you later on how it looks like for Beijing, that you understand that we are doing this already. Oh, and one more thing, definition of a startup ecosystem is quite different on who you're talking to. Why we started this is there is no comparative model of how to compare a Hanoi with a Kuala Lumpur, with a Singapore, with a Berlin. Usually the more mature ecosystems, they have their own model. So if you look at the Singapore, you will find certain information about how they represent the ecosystem. If you go to a Hong Kong, they have their own way. If you go to a Berlin, they have their own way. But how do you compare this? It's like comparing a pear with an apple. It's impossible. And we're currently developing this kind of to make a comparable model that you can start comparing, okay, why is this ecosystem doing better than that? And what do they have, what the other one doesn't have? So, as I said, what are you missing? And should you maybe create this in your own startup ecosystem or beyond? I'm not sure if I can zoom in. No, I cannot. Yeah, the only thing that I should actually show you is Beijing is a quite complete ecosystem. You see here that nearly everything is kind of covered. You have investors nicely represented, incubators are a lot, you have corporate innovation nicely covered, governments are good, community organizations are enough, service providers are more than enough, as always, and you have a handful of universities. Usually you don't need that many universities. If you would now showcase and compare this with, let's say, Ho Chi Minh, the picture can be completely different. So very often what you're seeing, what we have seen in comparing actually multiple ecosystems is that they are in lack of community organizations, that they are in lack of government, of corporates giving resources. And that's probably also something for the Vietnam case, that it's very hard to get actually the clients, the corporates with the money supporting the startups, that the service providers are not educated about how to serve startups, and the universities who do not have any entrepreneurship programs. This is something that we see super, super quickly. So the first things that develop usually is you will have 1 or 2 government entities, you have a good selection of incubators and accelerators, and you have a very, let's say, weak foot of investors which have only local knowledge, but don't have the capacity to scale a startup to be around. This is usually something that we see in less mature ecosystems. Yeah, and as I write here, one of the common mistakes is who are the players in the game? So before planning to reach out to other ecosystems, you need to know who you are, who you have, in order to also start negotiating with other players. What do you want from them, and why do you want it from them? Right? Oh, did I implement? I'm not sure. There was supposed to be a slide for Kuala Lumpur, but I will look into it if I have it somewhere. Yeah, so what is the ecosystem of other cities about? Again, if you have the goal as a Hanoi government or Vietnam government, and you want to work closer with the Beijing, Singapore government, how do you know what they have? And how do you know that what they have is what you need? And yes, okay. So it shows a bit different, but as I write here, not having a comparable model. So how do you know that this is the right city to reach out to? and who are you helping? So again, in the beginning, I said, do your homework, create a database of who needs something that your current ecosystem doesn't offer, and quantify and classify these demands and see either if an outside ecosystem can serve it or if you need to create the capacity yourself. And once you have a model that's comparatively okay, then you can start seeing if this ecosystem is the right one to work with or not. Especially for the Asia region, it's impossible to know, no, it's important to know whether or not you are ahead of an ecosystem or not. It could be that you're much stronger in a sense, let's say with service providers compared to an ecosystem that you see more superior to your own. So do your homework and know like what you're good at, what your strength is, before you start entering any kind of collaboration. Yeah, probably, yeah, more reflective question again. What do you want to connect with and why? I mean, I covered that a lot. And yeah, so let's dive maybe more into Q&A, something that hopefully is still there and that I can answer more in specific cases.
Okay, so in case like if should we like we are trying to build up like Hanoi or Ho Chi Minh City to be like a complete ecosystem that have all the components, all the players that in this stage. But if they lack something and then the other like satellite cities they don't provide, should we build the satellite cities to be the ones that provide the support for Hanoi or Ho Chi Minh City, or we should look for the ones that already have it, but like and then connect the other ones like Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City to that cities, but they might be far in like the geographic distance. So how do you think about it?
Yeah, 1 second. I'll just go back. So the question is how to empower more local ecosystems that are beyond Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh, more regional, that you maybe can help to grow with entrepreneurship. That's a question, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So if you have a city that's let's say a second or third tier city in Vietnam, one thing that you will see is they will not have probably any of these resources. They will not have any community organizations doing a job there. They maybe have a government which wants to incentivize something, like yourself. They will have maybe a handful of co-working spaces, which are under the incubators and accelerators, but they will have not investors that are locally present that much. And they will have nearly no corporates who will be keen to work with startups. And they have no service providers who have any knowledge about how to serve actually startups. So accounting firms don't know how to deal with a startup, or IP companies also don't know how to deal with startups. The one thing that you can do as a government is actually help to spread the knowledge of best practices within your country. So first of all, what you need to do is kind of get the overview of who you have in Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh, because those are your top cities. They know best how to do things within Vietnam. The moment you look at who's there and who's doing the best job, you need to ask the people to kind of spread the knowledge. Either you identify, for example, service providers who have a sub-branch in Hanoi, but also a sub-branch in a third-tier city. Those you need to encourage to develop services for entrepreneurs on the ground. Because it might be that they don't have in their portfolio because there are no entrepreneurs. The easiest way of starting actually to build a startup ecosystem is by education, and education starts with universities. So probably all your second and third tier cities also will have top universities, but with different focuses. So very often you will have, let's say, a focus on supply chain, or you will have on agriculture, or cultural science in the second and third tier cities, which are very strong there. And what you can help them to build are entrepreneurship programs that will help very early on developing the mindset within the people that it's also okay to start a startup and not just go a traditional way. Because when we talk again about the startup funnel, startups start here with an individual who wants to start. But once there is nobody here serving them, they will not go to this path. So you need to kind of lay the foundation on how does a person with an idea get to the stage of actually building an MVP? And how does a person with an MVP actually get to the stage of building the first company? And this needs different approaches. A person that is, for example, here, who has an idea, oops, let's go back. What they will need is something like a startup weekend, because they're serving people how to build a business over the weekend. So it helps them giving the tools about business model canvas, how to pitch your idea, how to formulate your idea, things like this. But they will also, so you need to think about where do they usually come from. It can come from unemployment. It can come from university students who have fancy ideas, but they don't know where to go to. Or it can come from employees being bored with their current situation and they want to do something of themselves and see that they can do things better than the company currently is doing, but they don't know where to go to. So I think the best thing that you can do is, if you have a very immature ecosystem in a third-tier city, is starting to build the foundation, helping them from university to get programs, but also for the employees who want a change of direction, or the unemployed people, to kind of get the basics. So focus on universities and community organizations. You will have time, because not anyone will probably evolve to become a more mature startup within 6 months, or a year even. So you can start facilitating community organizations, and I'm highlighting them more Startup Weekend than Startup Grind, because I believe that Startup Grind is great for inspiration, but in terms of getting hands-on experience about how to build a startup, Startup Weekend is much better. Or hackathon entities, or so hackathon entities are here, Dora Hacks or Angel Hack here, which are international organizations. I'm pretty sure Angel Hack is also in Vietnam, or more tech communities, which help to teach about skill sets that like coding, machine learning, AI. So bring them in. And in the universities, then just maybe invite local entrepreneurs to become a professor at the university and focusing on entrepreneurship programs. And then you start creating the funnel. And once you see the funnel starts, then you can start building the next steps, which are then, if you look again on the startup curve, is once you have an MVP, then you need to start having an office. You need to have accountants. You need to have people saving your IP. You need to have investors. You need to have acceleration programs. This all comes a bit later. So think about the curve, and that you start building the foundation first. And then on the way, you start building brick by brick by brick more resources that you can serve startups at a later stage easier. Yeah.
I want to ask a question. So if a country join your startup grind, so do they have a clear program to join startup grind, or you deal with it case by case? Let's say, do you have a exchange program between countries, or it only happens when there are a startup in a country want to reach the Beijing market, and then you have them individually by case. So what actually the activity between countries in startup grind?
I think I didn't get the overall question. It's a bit because not everything ends up in my ear, so there is a bit interference. Can you repeat the question a bit?
Yes, I mean, when a country join the network of startup blind, what activity did they join the network? They have to, is there any exchange program between countries in startup blind, or you will deal with other country case by case? Like if there is a startup in a country want to reach China's market, and you would help them join that market, or there is a clear program to join other country to
Okay. Yeah. So in general, we have multiple programs that are currently from the headquarters. One is an international startup program that we have, a global one, where we actually accept virtually any startup anywhere, and we help them with foundations on how to grow further. And we also help them with getting the connections and network in other cities and regions. But that is organized by our startup program team. I'm part of the community team. So since I'm currently running the APAC region, it is a bit different. So we currently encourage the countries that have a strong network and strong people on board to do regional conferences. So we want to have a China conference. We will have in September a Pakistan conference. Usually in December we have a Sydney, an Australia conference. So this is something that we do to strengthen kind of the ties between the ecosystems within a country. But then beyond this, my goal is actually to connect the regions with each other. So all the directors which represent local startup ecosystems, they're connected in a massive network where they can exchange best practices, but also can receive startups that maybe would come from a Switzerland to a Hanoi. They can do that in our internal network, but it all goes through the community builders. And right now I'm working more on developing these kind of collaborations. So we have a lot of, especially now with COVID, a lot of collaboration between, let's say, Singapore and Hyderabad, or with a Chengdu and a Paris, so that the ecosystems actually work together and they exchange speakers and resources, but also build a platform for the startups to learn. So if they come from Paris, that they can go to Chengdu and land there. And this is something quite unique that I haven't seen in any startup community organization.
Hi.
So, Mr. An, please.
Okay. Hi. My name is An, and I'm the general manager of project Office 844. So I'm very happy to talk to you today, and I hope we will have more effective exchange and look forward to future cooperation to support the startup ecosystem in Vietnam. So I have a question. I have two questions for you. The first one is how to attract business and less corporation to participate in the ecosystem to support startup. So in Vietnam, there is the fact that corporations support startup with the purpose of attracting high quality human resources from the startup, and with result in the with result in the startup being bankrupt, and there are also many corporations forming investment funds or creative hub. So, but not many in Vietnam. So I want to ask you, in your experience, what should we do? And the question, the second question is whether we can allocate resources to develop networks for each locality to build ecosystem, or we should focus on developing some ecosystem that have good resources, such as the human resources or economic and social. In addition to Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City, in Vietnam, some well resources province such as Quảng Ninh or Bình Dương. So how do you think about it? I have two questions.
The first question, can you explain shortly who do you want to attract and where?
As I say, we have many corporate or large business. So we have not many corporate or large business to support startup ecosystem in Vietnam. We have some corporate such as Viettel or CMC or APT. Some corporate to have some fund to investment to startup in Vietnam. So I think in Vietnam there is the fact that corporate support startup with the purpose of attracting the human resources from this startup. So this now is okay.
Yeah. So the question is about how to attract more corporates to actually enter the startup ecosystem, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. The question, I have a question back. Do you have a lot of corporates in Hanoi and let's say Ho Chi Minh? Because if there are corporates, but they are not aware of working with startups, it's a good problem. If there are not enough big corporates, that's another problem. So do you have enough companies, big companies there, but they don't want to work with startups? Or do you have not enough corporates in general in Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh?
I think we have enough corporate and large business in Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh. So I think they not interested to work with staff in Vietnam. I think so.
Yeah, I think a very simple tool that you can do is building an open innovation alliance and focusing there on the strong points of your national industry verticals. And what you can do in these open innovation alliances is that you have multiple challenges per year where you invite the corporates to kind of being the face of innovation, but inviting startups to kind of showcase what they're working on and how they can maybe disrupt the industries. One thing that corporates need, especially also in these times, is they need to look innovative and stable. And when you're just traditional for 20, 30 years and you're not working on innovation, at one point you become obsolete. And your selling point should be that you help actually the large corporates to work on their image with these kind of demo days. You don't need to spend all the money yourself. So it could be that you say, you maybe give the space and maybe you pay for food and drinks, but maybe some sponsorship money for challenges in a demo day, or could be a hackathon, would come from the corporates. Especially banks like to do this. So if you're working with your national banks, they would be usually willing to do that. So usually work with the Fortune 500s. That's a big important step, that you don't try to aim for Fortune 1000s or small and medium enterprises, because they will not have the mindset to work with startups. But usually in Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh, you should have enough representatives of Fortune 500 companies who are keen to actually work with startups and develop this. The other thing how you can do this is, it might be that currently your incubator and accelerator network is not mature enough in the understanding of how to serve actually corporates.
Yeah.
This is kind of, but I think you have companies like Plug and Play and 500 startups in the market, right?
Right, yes.
Yeah. So one thing that you can do is create a roundtable with those players, because the incubators and accelerators are usually the first ones who naturally step up to the point of working in corporate innovation as a service provider. so that you create a roundtable, you invite the people who are working there on how to upgrade the national level of the startup ecosystem by getting resources from corporate innovation. And I'm pretty sure that the incubators and accelerators will appreciate the invitation, and they will come up with ideas that they can do. And probably they will work on stuff that you are not aware of. Because one of the natures of corporate innovation is usually it's done behind curtains. So sometimes you don't even know that there is a telecom provider already working with startups through maybe a plug and play or a 500 startups. It's more about making things visible, about working on the transparency, making public announcements about we want to upgrade this. And I think once you step up as an official player wanting to upgrade and you're looking for corporates to work on this, offering vertical industry challenges, I think the people will help, will reach out to you. And if you want to, I can also, I don't know, see what I can do with my network in Vietnam and see if I can convince 1 or 2 companies to work there with you. Because for them, it's also, it has the reason of looking innovative, having access to innovative talent. Very often it's a hiring strategy as well. And being ahead of the curve of if there are competitors emerging that they should either acquire or support in a way. And usually Fortune 500s should have this foresight to be strong on these 3 points. So I can see if I can also do that from afar, from my point. And then the second question, allocating resources. Let me just repeat the question and correct me if I'm wrong. So it's either upgrading the strong ecosystems or reallocating resources to the new ecosystems, right? Is that the question? Okay. Excuse me?
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, so if that's the question, I personally would say that it's more important to actually upgrade new cities. Because you already have started a machinery in Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh, which just needs a push. The push can be done very easy with limited resources, just bringing together the right people and that they know each other and start building something by themselves. That's the bottom-up approach. You as a government can play the role of giving the framework in which they can operate. But at the end, you just create this framework and say, let's do this. And usually the players should go forward because they also want to create something. But starting something from scratch is much harder. It needs more foresight. And I think if you want to kickstart really your national innovation strategy, creating and repeating the basis of what you have in Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh into 2nd, 3rd, 4th tier cities is the way to go and to make really a difference. Because innovation and entrepreneurship can happen everywhere. And if you're capable of building the foundations in a 2nd or 3rd tier city, these people will look for perspective. And the first perspective they will be looking forward to is in Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh. So you will build a funnel also for startups to grow already within the country, and you give them perspective. And yeah, so I think that that would be the right choice to do.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, I think that's good for today. I think because it takes a little bit less. So thank you so much for sharing some very good insights with us, and then sharing with us like your journey in startup branch to like help building the communities in China as they are right now. And two things that I want to ask is, can you share the slide with us, because many of our participants here want to have the slides of today. And then the second one is, you said that you have like representatives in Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City, so maybe can you like connect them with us so that we can like elaborate more on like how we can like cooperate, and then how we can like have like startup branch to support in building the Vietnam startup ecosystem. So
yeah, So yeah, first point slides, of course, I can send you that probably by the end of the day. I have now a couple of follow-up calls, but I will share this with you. And the second question, if I understood it correctly, if I can support you with the development of university kind of, are you still there?
Like,
Are you still there?
yes, like running us with like helping us like building up the Vietnam startup ecosystem. And I think the first step would be like you said, you have two representatives in Vietnam right now, one in Hanoi and one in Ho Chi Minh City. So maybe we can make some connections and then we can discuss more details about what we can do in the like upcoming period.
Yeah. For sure, I can help you with that. For me, it would be best if you, so after this webinar, that you can maybe write down the next couple of points that you want to work on, that I can see how I can support you. If it's a university strategy, I can also support on this, of course. But it would be good to have from you the next kind of milestones that you want to reach, what your decisions are, because Mr. An also said that, so about my opinion, if they should upgrade first the Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh ecosystem or go more into second and third tiers. So maybe it would be good to get the feeling afterwards what your next milestones are that you want to do, and then I can add my insights and my network to support you on this.
So I think in the recent section and exchanges, Nam and we have collected a number of pain points from startup network in Vietnam. So Mr. Nam can share the three most popular pain points and ask for permission from advice from you, and we can work through email. Okay.
I'm really sorry, I did not hear actually anything.
Yeah. In the recent session and exchange, we have collected a number of the pain point, some pain point from other startup network in Vietnam. We have some network about mentor, about accelerator, about investor, and we have some pain point from them. So Mr. Nam will collect it, and we choose three most popular pain point from the network, and we want to share with you, and we want to advise from you to how to show these pain point, and we can and work from through email or seminar later.
Yeah, I think so. Best thing is if I can see the pain points first by email, and we can then set up maybe a second session where I address these pain points, what the nature of it is, where it comes from, and how you can maybe circumvent that.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, so Jelte, once again, thank you so much for joining us today. So have a nice day.
All right. Thank you so much for having me, and really sorry for the beginning disturbance of internet. It was a pleasure hearing and seeing you.
Yeah.
And yeah, hope we can continue working together. Have a good day and talk to you soon.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much.